The Tailor and the Hunter. A tailor, who was weary of his occupation, wandered off into the wood. After walking a whole day, he came into a dark forest. There, he heard someone singing. He went closer and saw a hunter sitting by a tree and singing to himself a little song. The tailor asked the hunter why he sat there idly in the forest instead of attending to his business. "I am tired of it," said the hunter. "It would be better for me if I could go in search of adventures." Rejoiced at these words, the tailor invited the hunter to keep him company. The hunter agreed, and the two roamed through the forest. But night surprised them before they could get out of the forest, and therefore they had to pass the night where they were. Both got into a high tree and slept till the break of day. Then they woke up and went on again with new strength. After a long march through the dark forest, talking with one another, they were suddenly disturbed by loud laughter. Looking up, they saw a few steps before them a little man who beckoned to them with his finger to follow. They did so and soon stood before a very strong castle. The little man knocked with a little rod at the great iron gate, and it opened. The little man pointed to a door in the court and vanished. The tailor thought that the little man meant by this to point out that they were to go through that door. So he took the hunter by the hand and led him through it. It opened into a kitchen with a small hearth on the left, and on the right there was another door. Through this they went into a room apartment that contained 2 beds, a table and 2 chairs. All this seemed as if it was made ready for them. The hunter was bold and spirited, but the tailor was not. He was more prudent than brave, and thought the best plan would be for only one of them to go to bed by night and for the other to keep watch. He felt there was something uncanny in this castle, ever since the little man had simply vanished. The first night the tailor kept watch. He placed a stool by the hearth in the kitchen and warmed himself. For it was late in the autumn and cold. The hunter had meanwhile laid himself down in one of the beds that were in the room and was sleeping soundly, when the hour of midnight approached. Then softly the door opened and a dwarf clad in green came in. He went to the hearth, held his hands over the fire and looked at the tailor with a sorrowful glance. When the tailor saw this, he put a piece of wood on the fire, thinking in this way he had done something that could please the little man. And in fact, the dwarf was rejoiced, for he clapped the tailor on the shoulder and then left with a cheerful look. Soon after, the hunter woke up, for it was daybreak already. As he sat up in his bed to call to the tailor from his watch, he saw on the table a number of dishes. Highly delighted, he jumped out of bed and fetched the tailor. In wonder they fell to, and the food was delicious, for they were hungry. After the meal, they entertained one another for some time with the journey and the adventures that were still in store for them. As night came on, the hunter prepared to take his turn at the watch. Full of fears, the tailor went to bed, while the hunter fearlessly went to the kitchen and made up a capital fire on the hearth. This night again came the little man and was going to warm himself. But there was no good-natured tailor this time. The hunter, a rough, thoughtless fellow, was not a bit pleased that so little a sprig could dare to warm himself at his fire. So he took a stick of wood and struck the poor little man's fingers smartly with it. Enraged at his rudeness and hard-heartedness, the little man departed, saying, "You shall regret it," in a threatening tone. The tailor had said nothing to the hunter about what had happened the night before, for he wished to wait for the watch night of the hunter to see whether he too would get such a visit. When the hunter told him of the matter, the tailor told his own story and reproached the hunter for having been so rough and rude. When evening came, he went to watch with still greater fear than the first time. At the regular hour, the little man again appeared and warmed himself. The tailor wished to make up for the ill behavior of the hunter, so he put several pieces of wood on instead of just one. The little man was evidently rejoiced at this, took a ring from his finger and put it on the finger of the tailor, saying, "Would you have any wish fulfilled? You have only to turn the ring on your finger, and I will be at once at your service." Then the dwarf bowed and vanished. In the morning, the tailor told the hunter again what had occurred, except that he kept silent about the ring. The hunter only laughed at him and said, "You're a soft fellow. Wait a bit, and I'll tackle the little one." The tailor warned him against it, for he had the firm conviction that they were in the dwarf's castle, and thought that if they behaved rudely, they would fare ill in the future. So he tried to steer up the hunter to a hasty flight. That was possible, for the tailor had the magical ring, but the hunter wanted to give the poor dwarf a beating once more in case he should venture into the kitchen again. The hunter went to his watch. The tailor lay restlessly in bed and could not sleep, for he thought of the flogging they would soon get. At the regular hour, the little man came as before and was about to warm himself. The hunter did as he had resolved and struck with all his might on the back of the little one. But now the dwarf was not so patient and quiet as before. He raised a loud cry. At this, the kitchen at once swarmed with dwarfs, who all fell on the hunter and gave him a long and sound thrashing, till at last he rushed through the door into the open air. The tailor had leapt out of bed and happily reached the open air without a blow. The two ran a long stretch before they could trust themselves to stand still to take a breath. Now, for the first time, the hunter felt the pain of the wounds inflicted on him by the dwarfs, but he could not help laughing at the tailor, for the latter stood before him, stripped to his shirt and stockings. For in his haste, he had forgotten to put on his clothes, and had run away straight from his bed. But now it occurred to him that he had the magical ring. Turning it in an instant, two dwarfs stood before him, and they had brought with them his garments. The tailor took them and put them on. Meanwhile, the two dwarfs disappeared. The hunter was almost beside himself with astonishment, and thought the tailor had made a secret treaty with the dwarfs. For this time, he became more and more distrustful towards the tailor, and sought to get rid of him. They had gone another long stretch when they came to a tree and sat down to rest from their toils and troubles. They were tormented by hunger, and the well-spread table would not have been out of place there. The tailor, always thinking of his ring, turned it, and at once a great gulf yawned before them in the earth. Out of this cleft came first four dwarfs with a table, which they placed before the two wanderers. Then came 7 dwarfs with dishes, and after these 7, 5 more, bearing plates, vessels, and chairs. There was no want of wine, as the whole dwarf company had come, so that it vanished again. This time, the hunter was not astonished, so greatly was he tormented by hunger. Instead of wondering, he fell on the dishes and ate all that he could lay his hands on. When they were both satisfied, the table with all its dishes and vessels disappeared. And now, for the first time, it occurred to the hunter that the dishes and all the vessels had been brought by the dwarfs. He also called to mind the 2 dwarfs who had brought the tailor his clothes, and he now believed even more firmly that the tailor was in league with the dwarfs, and his distrust continued to increase. But the good-humored tailor noticed nothing of all this. It was remarkable that after he received the magic ring, all fear had passed away from him, and now his courage surpassed even that of the hunter. At last, they came out of the forest and found a high road which led them on and on until they came to a city. As they entered it, they observed signs of sadness on the faces of the people, and when they asked why, they were told the following story. Once there ruled in the city a very hard-hearted king. His daughter was about to be married, and he gave orders that all the tailors of the city should one after the other make a fine and becoming one dress for his daughter, according to the fancy of the king. If a tailor could do this, a great reward was offered him, but if not, he was to make ready to die. The tailor thought to himself, "See, perhaps you may save the tailors of this city from the distress." So saying, he went into the house of one of the tailors. It so happened that this tailor was the very man who had the task first imposed on him, and as they went in, they met only mourners, for the tailor was bound to bring the dress to the king on the following morning, and should it not please him, he would no more return home to wife and child. When the two companions heard this, the wandering tailor promised to deliver his distressed fellow craftsman. So he asked for the material, but this had already been cut by the tailor in pieces, and the deliverance now seemed to be impossible. But our friend the journeyman took the material, thinking that did not matter, and went with the hunter into the room intended for them. In the evening, the journeyman laid the cloth on the table and then turned his ring with the wish that the dwarfs, while the tailor was sleeping with his family, should come along and make up the dress. Then he lay down to sleep. About 12 o'clock at night, he woke up, and already two dwarfs stood by his bedside, who handed to him the finished garment. The journeyman rose and handed over the garment to the tailor, who went with it trembling to the king. The princess put it on, and it fitted so well that hardly no other tailor could have made it better. The tailor got the promised reward and ran home joyously. But here he no longer found the two wanderers, for they had journeyed on while the tailor was with the king. Greatly did our friend the journeyman rejoice in the thought that he had made the tailor happy, and perhaps had saved many from death. But the hunter was still more jealous of the tailor than before. Again they had gone a long way when they came to a large, beautiful meadow. In the middle of it lay a monstrous stone. They went up to examine what might be under the stone, but how could they bring away the stone? They did not manage to roll it over and move it in any other way. But the tailor turned his ring, and at once the stone rolled from its position, and they saw a great hollow in the earth. As they were both very curious, they wanted to know what could possibly be in this hollow. So they agreed that one of them should be let down by the other. The hunter wove ropes out of straw and bound them together into a fresh rope that should serve for lowering. First the hunter let down the tailor. Down there, the tailor thought he had entered a new world. The beauty that reigned there surpassed all that he had ever seen before. He went through a lovely garden and came to a castle. As he stood looking on in wonder, 3 princesses came out of it. They were sisters and had been carried off by a dragon. So they had come into this castle, and their friends did not have an idea of where they actually were. Daily, the dragon flew away, and when he came back, they had to wait on him in the garden. Then he lay on their bosom, and they had to stroke his back while he was fast asleep. The father of the princesses had promised the hand of his youngest daughter and his kingdom to the man who freed his daughters. All 3 now greeted the tailor and asked him whether he would deliver them. He would have to fight the dragon, they added, but the tailor nevertheless agreed. The princesses gave him a sword and bade him to wait behind a bush till the dragon came there, while the princesses sat down on a bank. It was not too long before the tailor heard a roaring and flames sparkling in the air. The dragon came snorting into the garden, and lay down on the bosoms of the princesses. While they stroked him, he fell asleep. Then the tailor came forth with his sword and thrust it into the neck of the dragon, thus slaying him and delivering the princesses. Quickly, the tailor brought the princesses to the opening and called to the hunter to draw up the princesses first and then himself. The hunter did so, but when he had drawn the tailor halfway up, he cut the rope and the tailor fell back in again. The tailor had forgotten his ring for a while and therefore had to remain for some time in the cavern. Meanwhile, his false comrade had gone with the princesses to the king and had given himself out as their deliverer. Soon the wedding day was at hand, but by then the tailor had remembered his ring. He turned it, and in a moment hundreds of dwarves were busy building a flight of stairs to lead to the opening of the hollow. When this was ready, the tailor went up and thus escaped. Now he turned the ring with the wish that a dwarf might come and show him the way to the king. A dwarf appeared at once and led him to the king, and in front of the king the tailor maintained that he was the one who had actually saved the princesses, and the princesses happily confirmed it. The hunter then was given a casket of gold, but banished from the land. The tailor married the daughter of the king and ruled happily and wisely over his subjects. Whether he is still alive, I cannot tell.